Hi everyone, it is new release time here for Megan Quinlan Studio, and I wanted to share one of the stencil sets that is part of my spring 2023 release, and that is the In Thought silhouettes or profiles. So we have 3 sets of large and small profiles. And I wanted to create those because way back when I did a stencil set that was just a like a member set for Stencil Girl, and it had a profile in it. And I loved it so much, but I wanted to have something similar in my shop. So I did a whole bunch of new silhouettes for this release. And I love using them all the time, especially when I'm using my Jaya journal or journal into your art journal, because I do a lot of writing and I like to have text right next to the figures. So I've been using them a lot. If you've been watching me on Instagram, they've been on there quite a bit. So I have lots of samples that I've been sneaking because I just can't help myself. So anyway, those are out in the world. And I also, for the release, kind of wanted to create something different with the silhouette. So I had started playing around with the watercolors, which I use often with my stencils. And these just kind of came together very serendipitously. And they're so beautiful that I just wanted to share some tips and tricks for using these to create some really pretty watercolor silhouettes if you're doing a whole page. Obviously, it's recommended to be using watercolor paper because it's going to produce the best effects. It's meant to hold a lot of water. Sometimes mixed media paper does work in these cases, and also like the dilutions. Mixed media, I feel like that almost works like watercolor paper as well. And then lastly, you know, silhouettes are fun to trace on a piece of paper with a pencil and then flip it over and cut out your tracing, and then you have a printed paper for a silhouette as well. So so I just thought I'd show you some of these fun tricks, but these just came out. I fell in love with these, and I'll probably be making tons more. These are also great for like making a really pretty focal piece or a card. If you're art journaling, or if you want to do a card. I actually should have brought my kiddo who turned 17. I made her a birthday card that looked almost just like this. So anyway, something I wanted to share. The first thing you need is a piece of watercolor paper. And people ask me often about the watercolors and the techniques that I use. So I just thought it can't hurt to get me on here and again to just do some of the watercolor stuff. And you want to get your whole page filled as best you can. I'm not going to go too crazy because I don't have a craft sheet here. And you don't want to do it super dark because you're going to layer over it with another color. So, you know, I like to get some varying shades in here. So like I'll add a couple other colors, usually brown, but it could be anything. But again, you just want a very kind of light mixture on there so it's not super, super dark. And then it will dry much less vibrant. So when you use watercolors, if you're unfamiliar, they start out super vibrant, but as they dry, they really tone down like almost 50%. So I'm going to let that dry. I have one that is dried here. When you're working with stencils and watercolors, it does take some practice. And I have some other videos on my channel here where I talk about tips and tricks for using stencils and watercolors. So I'm not going to get too crazy going into that. But what I will say is it does take practice. So practice is pretty much the most important thing, because it's really getting the brush in your hands and getting a feel for how much paint to use, how little paint to use, that sort of thing. So just to be kind of contrasty here, I'm using Renaissance Watercolors, and I get these from April Matte. This is Etsy. I'll put it in my description because she has the best watercolors. I love Renaissance. So, you know, one tip I can say is just if you go like this and a lot of water isn't coming off, then you know you've probably got enough on your brush, but not too much. And I'm going to brush away from the really detailed part very quickly, and I'm not going to go back over there again. So that way there's less potential for it to bleed. I will say with the bigger stencils, I tend to just do the outline and then I'll come back and kind of go through and fill it in. The reason for that is if I just do the outline quickly and I'm not working right next to it the whole time, again, there's just less chance for water to get in there and leak. And then I'm gonna lift the stencil on the other side. I'm gonna push it up with my finger and just quickly lift it. So most of the time it comes out pretty well. You know, I have a little bit of seepage here. Sometimes you can remedy that by just getting a paper towel and pushing, you know, if you have like a nice fine line and just pushing there. But for me, that's plenty fine. And now I kind of have the image on there, so I can kind of follow the lines of the stencil and really add some bolder color in there if I want, like that. And then, you know, when I'm all done, I'll kind of let it air dry. And watercolor is a fun thing because it isn't permanent. So when you're doing things like this and you're layering, you know, if you stay along the lines, it can all work to look almost like your original first stencil. So you can kind of layer over it, but it's tricky because if it's super wet and you're doing this, you could actually wear away at some of the paper. So again, it just takes a lot of practice. So if you go into it with an open mind, like, okay, I'm just going to do some practice runs first and see how that goes, then you can have a better time of it. And it looks totally different once it dries. So I'm just following the lines there. And most of the time I don't even need to do this. I just thought it would be fun to create a little more of a bolder look on here. And then I would let this dry. You can see here, like some of the paper is just starting to come up. So I'm going to let that dry. And then you can go in like I have here and just add some details. So I usually use, you know, like paint pens. You want to make sure that your watercolors are completely dry. So I might go in and just add some sgraffito text, whatever, you know, strikes me. So I always like writing, you know, it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of cool to add some writing. I might go in and add marks. So I'll use, you know, often I'll use, this is a Uniball Signo. Here, I don't know if you can see, I use like a larger paint pen, and just kind of added stuff as I went along. So as this dries, you know, I've got some purples here, so it could be fun to keep working with the contrast and playing on it. I love to use old stamps. So I have like a purple stamp here. Kind of went on crooked. And I love text, so I have some text I made from an earlier stamp set. And you really can put things however you want. I like clusters, so I'm going to cluster this over my stencil. Still a little wet. And then I can, again, I can tone everything down instead of doing more color. I can just go in and add some marks and doodles, you know, and I always encourage people to find marks that work for them, that make them happy. You know, there's so many fun ways to add your own signature to stuff. Sometimes I put dots and stuff, you know, just kind of playing around with the actual piece and the watercolors. And then, you know, you have these beautiful cards, or again, focal points. You could do this if you have a journal page that has paper that you can use, or you can do a smaller page on watercolor and put it in your journal. It's really up to you. And then again, the tracing is fun too, because you can go in and glue that to something like a background that you've already started, or on a journal page. And you can actually, I know I have this out, but I'm loving the colors in this journal, so I'm just gonna keep playing with the pink in this. I'm probably out of frame, sorry. So I'm just gonna add this here. And there you go. So I hope I gave you some ideas for the new stencils. They're really awesome. Again, you get the 3 silhouettes. So that's 1, 2, 3. And I think they'll be really fun to play with, not just doing a simple kind of black and white silhouette like I've done on some of my pages, but to do some of these other effects and use them in other ways could be really fun. So something like that. So anyway, I just thought I would do a quick little video to give you some ideas. If you get these, they're so fun and awesome. I'll put a link to my Etsy shop as well. And I'll be back for some more demos soon.